in, well, now. So again, welcome everyone. Lovely to have you all here for the webinar Shaping Diamond Open Access Criteria for Journals. My name is Sona Araste. I work in both CRAFT-OA and DIAMAS, and I will serve as your moderator today. And before we get to the actual content and discussion heavy part of this webinar, I do have a few tiny things to announce. So first of all, you will probably have noticed that you have been muted and your camera has been turned off when you entered this webinar. Please keep it that way, simply because it makes it easier for our speakers, for everyone to follow our speakers and experts who will present in a bit. This also means all questions, comments, and remarks you have, please post them in the meeting chat. We will manage, sort, collect, and forward them to our speakers. And also, again, if you haven't been there about 1 minute before I said this, please note that this meeting will be recorded and shared via DIAMAS YouTube channel. Thank you very much. Okay, so about what we do today, the actually interesting part about this webinar. So first, we will have short presentations on both CRAFT-OA and DIAMAS by our lovely speakers, Margot Baguer and Johan Rohrig. I will introduce them in a bit. They will also present the criteria for Diamond Open Access journals we will discuss in a bit, as well as use in borderline cases to explain why this criteria are actually hard to get to in the first place. What will be happening then is a community consultation, which will obviously involve all of you who have agreed to participate today. And we will facilitate this kind of community consultation with a Mentimeter session, so a tool that will allow all of you to take part in this and express your opinions. And I will explain how that works later on when we come to that part. So, one last thing before I give the word to Johan. Just with all of this, please keep in mind that the idea behind these criteria is to have an operational definition of criteria for Diamond OA journals. By definition, that means that they will be to some extent simplistic because they are supposed to be binary. So yes, to lead to a yes or no decision, is this journal Diamond or not? But Johan and Margot will elaborate on that, I'm sure of that. Okay, and Johan, I will stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Sona. I'll try to share mine.
Yeah, and while you do that, so Johan, our first speaker, is the executive director of Coalition S, and is also the co-principal investigator of the DIAMAS project, which he leads together with Pierre Monnier. He also, because that is not enough, is co-editor-in-chief of the Diamond Open Access journal Glossa, a journal of general linguistics. And lots of more things, but in with a look at on the clock, I will give the word to Johan now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And in the interest of not embarrassing me more. Okay, I will talk about the practical definition of Diamond OA from principles to concrete use cases. I would like to first give some context. This has to do, I mean, this entire definition, this operational definition, as Sona said, of Diamond Open Access, has to do with the context of the CRAFT-OA project, which is here on your screen, supporting Diamond Open Access to achieve full potential. And more specifically, one of the goals of that project, which is the sister project of the DIAMAS project, as you know, that I'm the co-PI of, to develop a Diamond Discovery Hub. And the purpose of the Diamond Discovery Hub is to provide a comprehensive registry of institutionally published scholarly open access journals in Europe, Diamond Open Access journals, increase its visibility of the journals, the publishers, the service providers, and its infrastructures, and to ensure then technically robust solutions in collaboration with EOSC for registering, harvesting, harmonizing, validating the content aggregation and the content formats. So that is really a kind of a technical but element, but there's also a visibility element there. But in order to do that, of course, if you want to make a registry, then you need to know what to count as a Diamond Open Access journal. And that is easier said than done, because of course, many journals might want to call themselves Diamond Open Access, but maybe they are not, maybe they are. This is something that we need to provide clarity about. And that's what we're here to discuss. It's not like we want to impose a definition of diamond. Who are we to impose a definition? But it is definitely something that I think we should discuss with the community and co-create a definition with the community of people who think that they are in Diamond Open Access journal. So this is the more complicated bit of EOS. This gives you the entire frame that maybe Margot will enlighten us about, that will lead to the establishment of the Diamond Discovery Hub and of all the bits and pieces that the CRAFT-OA project is working about, just to give you an indication of how important this is and how technically proficient this will become. So Diamond OA, what do we call Diamond OA? Let's first go back a little bit to the many meanings of Diamond OA beyond no fee. Well, it's important to recall that the name Diamond OA was defined by Marie Farge in 2012. There's no discussion about this. This is absolutely documented, so it's very important to know this. And she said explicitly, you know, imagine a journal that has an editorial committee, a collective of people who would review work and then rely on service units whose role it will be to put the selected articles online. So already there was this idea to have the journal controlled by the academic community on the one hand, and service providers, this is the way I interpret service units, on the other hand, who would provide the technical work of making the journal available online. In the context of Coalition S, we talked about collaborative non-commercial publishing models for open access, but even we had to think at the time what we actually meant by that. But it was a way to avoid, of course, the colors and the diamond and the platinum and all the confusion around that. But I'm not sure that we succeeded in that. And of course, in the EC context, in the call actually for the EOS project that resulted in the CRAFT-OA project, it talked about not-for-profit institutions that run open access publishing initiatives in the public interest and do not levy author processing charges. So this notion, of course, of author processing charges comes back a lot, right? Do not charge fees to either authors or readers in the Diamond Action Plan of 22. The Toluca Declaration also mentioned that. No fees, but also all content-related elements are led by scholarly and owned by scholarly communities. And in the paper that I wrote with Pierre Mounier, we insisted on the same elements. So basically 2 elements: no fees for reader or authors on the one hand, the economic element, on the other hand, the governance element, namely the scholarly communities are in the lead and they own or control the content of the papers. But how now do we operationalize this in the context of having to set up a Diamond Discovery Hub and having to say, you know, having to see how a journal complies with criteria for Diamond Open Access or not? And this is what we came up with. And again, this is really open for discussion. I think the first 4 ones will not be much of a problem. Persistent identification, I think that's the least you can ask of a journal, that they have an ISSN. Also that they are a scholarly journal, and that's already more problematic, because how do we define what is scholarly? The way we define it in the Diamond Open Access standard, EXIF version 2, is that there should be a rigorous evaluation process. So it's not anyone publishes whatever they want. No, there has been a rigorous evaluation process, either by peer review or by a review of an editorial committee, as happens in many sectors of social sciences and humanities. But it is not just the author who decides to publish. I mean, somebody has vetted the paper for its quality, the quality of its contents. That is important. Third is open access, no-brainer, open access with open licenses. All outputs of the journal should be open access and must carry an open license. And also the no mandatory fees. The journal should not be subject to any mandatory fees imposed by its publisher, and there should be no mandatory fee of any kind as a condition for publication. We mean this here, for instance, for society journals, where only members can publish upon, of course, the payment of a fee to belong to the society. That's one of the hidden fees that we sometimes see. And we don't want that. We want the journal to be really open to all comers who think that they have something to say. And then it's up to the editors to decide whether or not that paper is admissible, of course. Open to all authors. This is the next condition. Authorship in the journal should not be limited to any type of affiliation. So that is, again, that condition that I mentioned about scholarly societies. It's not just the members of a scholarly society who should be able to publish in that journal. I mean, so there is no fencing of any kind around the journal. Any author can submit. And then the last bit is community owned. How do we define community owned? Well, the easy part there is to say that the journal should be owned by organizations or parts of an organization whose main mission is to perform research of scholarship. So that means labs, associations for the promotion of science, scholarly societies, research performing organizations of any kind, universities, libraries, university presses. You can think of many more examples. That counts as community owned because those are organizations whose main mission it is to perform research and scholarship. The last condition is actually the one that is open for discussion today, I hope, and one that we really should think about whether we want this, is to broaden it up a bit. And the question is really, should we broaden this up a bit? And I'll give you some examples later of how that, why that matters. For instance, if it's not clear who owns the journal, or if the journal is in the hands, the journal title is in the hands of a publisher, could we envisage that, for instance, if the journal editorial board has a declaration of independence of some sort in an editorial, clearly stating that they can operate independently from the publisher who owns the title, would we consider that sufficient? As sufficient proof of community independence, or as a community-led journal. If it's not community-owned, at least it would be community-led. And this is really open for discussion. We are not at all certain about this. This is why we have these kinds of webinars to discuss with you, the community, to whether this is a good idea or not, what the arguments could be in favor and against. One argument in favor, I think, is that we do not want that Diamond is in no way opposed to commercial activities. I think service providers need to be paid. I mean, publishing costs money, and we cannot do everything ourselves. I mean, copy editing and typesetting, for instance, is not something that you necessarily want to be doing yourself as an editor. But the question is open. How do we see that? How do we see the relationship with commercial publishing, and to what extent do we want to go? Where do we want to go with the notion of ownership of the journal title? And that's really an issue that's open for discussion. If you ask me what such an editorial independence statement should be, I will say, because as some of you know, perhaps I transitioned the journal Lingua, or the community of the journal Lingua, to the journal Glossa about 9 years ago. And so I've given these matters some thought. And for me, the editorial independence really should be that editors are representative of the scholarly community. That's the easy one, but they should have complete autonomy in many cases. Composition and renewal of the board, autonomy about editorial decisions, and access to the list of reviewers, and also sole authority to contact reviewers and authors, because in many cases that is problem of gold open access journals, for instance, of a certain type, that is very problematic when the publisher themselves starts harassing reviewers and authors to obtain copy. So that is one of the things I want to include there. Also, no quotas, no quotas for publication. You have to reach this number of papers a year. No, complete independence as regarding to contents, and of course procedure in place between the journal's team board and the publisher. So that's an example of what such an editorial independence statement could look like. There are, of course, always borderline cases. I'll come to these now. For instance, take the Journal of Patient Experience, which is a very interesting journal published by the Association for Patient Experience, completely paid for that association, paid for by that association, published by the commercial publisher Sage. Very important journal, of course. You know, it allows patients to look to have information, education, networking opportunities, focusing on practices, medical practices. Journal is peer-reviewed, fully OA, authors retain copyright. Everything is there, open licenses, funding, publishing costs are sustained by the association. The only thing they would probably need here is a declaration of independence for Sage. And what we would need is a slightly broader interpretation of what it means to be scholarly. This is why we said scholarly for us, scholarly publication means to be peer reviewed. And since that is satisfied, I think that is fine. But still, there is this relation of independence with respect to the publisher. There's a couple of other cases here. Culture et Recherche is a journal, a French journal that depends on the ministry. It's owned by the ministry, but the people inside are academics, and there is a peer review process. It is clearly a valid diamond journal, but you would perhaps, since it is the ministry and the ministry itself is not engaged directly in research, right? A self-declaration of independence, especially political independence, may be necessary in this case. Again, the same is true for the Revue de l'Histoire des Religions, run by a commercial publisher, but the editorial staff is in the Collège de France. It's unclear who owns the title. A declaration of independence may be necessary. It may not be a real issue, but at least a clarification may be necessary in this case. And then finally, and this is my last case, there is the case of subscribe to open journals, right? This is probably the most famous case. As we know, subscribe to open is diamond adjacent. It really allows everyone to submit a paper to those journals as long as the subscriptions are paid. I mean, it's an equitable model in that sense. Many of the publishers who are engaged in Subscribe to Open are smaller publishers who are certainly trying to serve the academic community. So the question is there what we do. And this is where this case of declaration of independence may be useful, and it's probably useful to enter a discussion with the Subscribe to Open community and with the publishers engaged in Subscribe to Open to see what they think and to see how they stand in this. But really, this depends on this community and ourselves deciding whether it's really worthwhile or to do this, to give up this idea that the journal title should be owned by the academic community, or to have a kind of an intermediate process, an intermediate position where we say, well, you know, the journal title is not the most important element. What is really most important is control over the contents, more than control over the title. But again, this is something that is up for discussion. I do not pretend to have the answers to this. This is why we brought it here to you today. And so this is my last slide with all the symbols and the nice icons, showing what we want a diamond journal to have as essential conditions. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Johan. So our next speaker, and I will introduce her while I fumble with my tabs to open the slides, is Margot Bagger, as I already said. She is the head of the University of Göttingen's publishing services, including the Göttingen University Press, the journal platform, and several repositories. And she is also, she and her team that is, coordinating the CRAFT-OA project and participating in the Palomera and the DIAMAS project as well. Sorry, just need 1 second to share my screen. Okay, Margot, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So those of you who have paid close attention to starter slides, you probably saw that Johan and me, we both used a raw diamond, because this is also supposed to be very glitzy, the diamond sector, but it's also about recognizing what is there already as potential and trying to bring the best out of it. Because what we've seen lately is that there is a lot of potential in these smaller journals, because they cover, for instance, certain regions of the world. They are usually much more multilingual than the ones from the mainstream sector, and they cover disciplines that are often not neglected, but not so covered so well from the mainstream sector, and that is, for instance, social sciences and humanities. So therefore, the diamond. Next slide, please. We mentioned the CRAFT-OA project already. I won't read you through the number of consortia, but I think most important is that we have several partners within our consortium who are publishing themselves, either as publishers or as publishing services or as infrastructure provider, meaning that within our consortium of 23 institutions, we are somehow also the community that we try to serve. Meaning that we test what we ever do on ourselves, on our own platforms, on our journals. And that also means that, for instance, the definition, the one that we are now trying to develop, has to be workable for us also, because if it works for us, then the likelihood that it works for others is extremely high. And therefore, we also put this emphasis on looking into border cases, because when it comes to diamond, we sometimes need the binary decision, as Sona said in the beginning, but we also realize that there's something like a continuum going on. Next slide, please. Next, click again. So we have been funded in order to evolve and strengthen the Diamond Open Access institutional publishing landscape. So the European Commission decided deliberately to strengthen the institutional sector. This is where the Diamond Open Access model is more prevalent, regardless how we shape the definition clearer. But where no fees apply to authors, this is definitely more prevalent in the institutional sector or in the sector that is run by institutions. And that is enough for this slide. Next one, please. We have several work packages, and we have a very close cooperation with the DIAMAS project, which is looking, for instance, into standards and quality criteria for this part of institutional publishing. Because if we claim as the institutional sector that we also do publishing along with the commercial sector, it has to be serving the same needs as any other model for authors and for institutions and for readers, meaning that it has to be on a high level of professional and mature publishing. And what we definitely are set out for is that we want to serve these communities and to enable them to fill their full potential. And that sometimes can be quite tough, as you've seen already on the criteria that Johan mentioned. Next slide, please. And what we aim for with the Diamond Discovery Hub is that we want to identify the largest possible set of what identifies as Diamond Open Access journals, and we collect and store and also make visible and harvestable the metadata of these journals, and to ensure that these metadata are as rich, as interoperable, and as complete as possible, because the aim is also to hand over these metadata to other data aggregations, and, for instance, to ease the uptake of journals in the directory of open access journals, to ease the uptake in the European Open Science Cloud and other data aggregations. If we can collect these data, then we want to have structured information on journal ownership, governance, and mission. It's not that you will see such a lengthy description, but a small metadata field on these aspects, because if we want to distinguish Diamond Open Access journals from non-Diamond Open Access journals, these are the aspects we anyway look into. And that is enough for this slide. And the next one, we will be relying on the Diamond Discovery Hub on an editorial team. And that means that this editorial team needs to check information and decide yes or no. And it's difficult because we should probably also have some states in between, almost diamond, raw diamond, looks like a diamond, but we can't because it needs to be a discovery, and therefore it needs to be a yes or no decision. And we aim for a partnership model, meaning that we will not just look into single journals, but that we will work with defined, trusted institutional publishing service providers, and that includes journals. Next one. This is again a repetition of what Johan has introduced already. And in green, you see that those are things where we still struggle and where we will need your input. So this is not written in stone, but this is the way that we need to break it down. Next slide, please. Because when you have to build up a selection, you always have a general dilemma. And that is, for instance, if you're too easy on the selection criteria, you're risking false positives, meaning you have unwanted entries in your selection. Journals disguising as diamond and institutional rerun or editorial ownership. But maybe even more risky is that you're too hard on your selection criteria, and then you have unwanted exclusion from your selection because you're risking too many false negatives. And we've seen with other selections, such as directory of open access journals, when the reward is high, the gaming can begin. It doesn't necessarily begin, but if there is a reward included in being listed somewhere, some people might want to game the thing, and that means the selection criteria need to hold for this. So being elastic and flexible and open enough not to risk too many false negatives, and at the same time not become an incentive in itself. Because the idea of a selection of diamond open access journals should be that they are visible and not that you win a prize because you managed to get in there. Next slide, please. So we have a bit of a challenge that we have some observable data points that we can assess, such as prevalence or absence of mandatory fees. This can be checked, and hopefully no journal then afterwards writes an invoice to some poor author saying, well, we didn't claim that we have author fees, but now you can decide. So this is, we need some observable data points, and the ones that are really easily visible, those are not fully machinable, machine readable, actionable, probably is the right term, but those we can easily check. An editorial board, also a machine. For instance, persistent identifiers for title level and articles available, are open access licenses available. Then we have observable data points that need a bit of digging, such as editorial models around ownership, editorial models around quality control, content quality, also declarations of independence. But we also have, when it comes to the aspect of diamond open access, we have data points that we can almost not observe. We can't look into the details of contracts, checking the fiscal details of ownership, or checking who owns the title or who has the right to change any bylaws. So this is where we need to display some trust that things are working the right way. And we also can't check whether a journal or a service provider has an enduring commitment for a fair form of open access. So those are things we just can't check. And if you check back now your own understanding of diamond open access, the more of the non-observable data points you include in your own definition, the more difficult it will be to assess whether something is diamond or not. And so even though it looks like a simplification, there are rightful ideas that, okay, no, let's only define if there is no fee for authors, then it's diamond. That is easy to check and that is actionable. But if we are aiming towards a fair open access, an equitable open access, strengthening the institutional sector, strengthening scholarly owned, then we can't just do with that one. Next slide, please. And with that, I'm obviously done. Okay.
Thank you very much, Margot. That was indeed the last slide. Was briefly afraid my laptop gave up on me, but no. So what is supposed to be the next part of this is the already briefly described Mentimeter session. So for that, I will briefly explain how we do that. First of all, for that to work, you actually have to join the Mentimeter session either via following the link that will be posted in the chat in every second by now, or by entering menti.com and entering the code that is written on the slide I am presenting at this very moment, or by scanning the QR code who is on the right of this slide. And while you do that, I will briefly explain how we imagine that this is supposed to go. So the idea is that we will present you 3 statements that are based upon the criteria Johan and Margot just presented, and you can indicate how much you agree or disagree with them. And after each statement, after you indicated for each statement how you feel about that, there will be the possibility to give feedback on that or to explain why you positioned yourself on a scale the way you did, which will then feed into the discussion we're having. So we're doing this one after another, meaning we will have a statement, then the statement where you can indicate if you disagree or agree with the statement. Then we will have a slide where you can enter a comment or a remark about that very thing, or how it connects to other aspects. And then we will discuss this, each statement. I say statement, but it's basically the kind of section of this session. So each section for about 10 to 15 minutes, depending on how fast we go with that. And you will also have the option to pose other questions in the chat, obviously. And we will then discuss this with our distinguished speakers. So I will now change to the Mentimeter session, which you should be able to see in presentation mode all. So, okay, I see thumbs up. That is very good. Lovely. I see, woo, it's very bright now. Okay, so I will give you about 20 more seconds to join the session, and then I will start the slides, okay? And until then, we can sit in uncomfortable silence, if you all wish to. Okay, it seems like it's working for everyone. I have had no complaints so far. Lovely. Okay. So the first statement, and for that I would ask you to think back about what Johan said about the borderline cases and what Margot said about which aspects we're still thinking about in terms of the ownership questions. So the first would be a Diamond Open Access journal is a journal that is owned by an organization or an institution that performs research. Okay, we see a slight tendency for agree. Interesting. I'll wait a few more seconds. Okay, so the responses are slowing down. So I will very, very gently moderate toward the next slide, which again will give you all the opportunity to leave remarks, and will give the opportunity to our speakers to see your remarks. anonymously, of course, but to see your remarks and then discuss them. All right, so 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, lovely. Okay, and now a field should pop up where you can enter your remarks and comments. So please feel free to get creative, not too creative, but creative nonetheless. Okay, so we have the first bit of information. So I disagree because a scholarly society does not perform research. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so from what I can see by now, there are basically two strands of argumentation very prominent. So one is about the definition of what performing research actually means, especially in comparison to what Johan just described as promoting science or open science. And the second would be that ownership in itself has to be discussed as a criterion. Do you maybe want to elaborate on that, both of you, meaning Margot and Johan?
Yes, if you want me to. Yeah, I think to perform, I mean, it's the mission who is performing research, right? It's not that I mean, we can quibble about this, but it's not so much that. Of course, it's not the association that performs research. I mean, an association is just an association, but the mission, usually associations or institutions have a mission, and that should. But it could be facilitate the promotion or accessibility of research. That could also be a better term. But what we want to exclude here, I mean, I'll be very blunt about this. What we want to exclude there is commercial publishers, because of course commercial publishers could also say that they facilitate the promotion of research. They have very often tried to profile themselves as part of the scholarly community, which they are not. They are service providers, in my view. So I think what we need is a term that clearly delineates what we mean by the scholarly community and what we don't mean by the scholarly community. And so if anyone has a better term, I'll take it. You know, but we can certainly discuss this. Margot?
So the mentioning on Mentimeter are exactly running around the same lines of thinking and contemplating that we have within our groups. Is that one thing is we want to avoid false positives, but we absolutely also want to avoid false negatives, meaning not excluding, for instance, examples that Joanna just posted into the chat. So a charity that runs a journal and is fully on the side of trying to serve science and is community driven. And we always will have a problem, because if we use such a selection criteria to say this is in or this is out, whereas we look at a continuum of aspects, there is always a challenge. And yes, maybe we are too strict when we say performing research, because learned societies are also in a way facilitating performing research and networking researchers. So we probably need to recoin this very wording.
Yes,
when
I
it
think
comes
so. But at the same time, making sure that service providers cannot, I mean, you know, certain big publishers have certainly tried to profile themselves as being part of the of the scholarly community, and that is not something that we would want to include, because that is not my definition, or that is not anyone's definition, I think, of the scholarly community. But
maybe you
yes.
sorry, apologies. Please go on.
No, that's all right. We need to rethink this. I mean, if we can, you will save the Menti chat.
Yes,
So,
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
No, I
So
think this is. I mean, I think these are interesting responses. We need to think.
Yeah. And one, for instance, is why exclude commercial publishers? It's not that commercial publishers as service providers need to be excluded because they are commercial publishers. But
no, but we don't want them to, as a default, to hold the title as a.
Exactly. So
we say
the point,
community owned, we need to define what community owned means. It's not so much that we want to exclude them.
Yeah. So can I please finish, Johan? So what I think what we need to do is that if we want to strengthen the sector that is not dominated by commercial players who, for instance, have to report to their shareholders or have to create a profit or are supposed to even create lots of revenues, that we need to strengthen the sector that is not bound by these limits or interests. And therefore, we need to start somewhere. And we are fully aware that there are commercial players of various flavors. So, for instance, Open Libraries of Humanity is privately owned, so it's not performing research. At the same time, we would say, yes, this qualifies for Diamond. So there is nobody excluded per se because it's either or, but we need to strengthen what we want to achieve with defining Diamond Open Access, because what we shouldn't be seeing is that suddenly a flavor of open access is defined by a sector that is mainly trying to maximizing profits, which is okay in a capitalistic world, but then it shouldn't be defining what Diamond is.
Maybe we can briefly also go into the questions that are posed within the Mentimeter session. So could you maybe just briefly elaborate in that context on what about a university press that operates as a commercial publisher? Because we all know it's a very prevalent event, right? So that happens a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at some of the other comments. Of course, there are a number of society publishers that work with societies that work with commercial publishers, but there is a variety of situations there that we know, right? I mean, in many cases, the societies own the title, and in that case, there is absolutely no problem if they own the title and in addition pay for the publication without necessarily so that it's open for all authors and readers, then there is no problem. The problem really arises, and who owns the title should really be, can be a scholarly society or any type of organization. But the problem really is when the title is with the commercial publisher, because that creates, in my opinion, a power differential that we may or may not want to compromise with, and I think this is still something.
To the comment of yes, that some university presses act like commercial publishers. Yeah. That is definitely one of the cases where it becomes difficult. Yeah, we could have said, we rule out all UK-based university presses because then we don't have a problem, but that definitely won't be working, because we have a continuum of university presses. Some are small, some are bringing a huge profit to their university. That's just a very small number. But we can't just say, oh, university presses are automatically the Diamond publishers because they are university presses. And this is why it's so difficult. And this is why it's also a really daring endeavor that we try to define this, because those are exactly the lines of discussions that we also had within our projects. So you as the audience, you exactly put the finger into the wound, as to say, that university presses are not all the same.
Thank you very much. So
Yes,
there was actually,
these are useful comments. These are excellent comments. We will take them into account in a new
we will
formulation
all
of
take
what
them
we
into
mean,
account. Yes.
yeah, by community-led, community-owned.
I just wanted to point to this question because I think we can briefly discuss it still. So basically, what it goes back to is the idea that the research conducted by whatever organization provides the Diamond Journal, how much does it have to be affiliated with the content of research, right? If I got that question right. So is there anything on that, or is it just general performing research, or what we just discussed in a more broader
Yeah,
sense?
I'm not sure I understand that question. If a research institution in physics publishes research that has no relevance to the field of physics, why would that be a problem? As long as it's peer reviewed and it's a scholarly journal, and there's not necessarily a problem there that I can see. I mean, we didn't say that the institution who owns the journal has to narrowly restrict itself to publication in that field of research, right? That is
As far as I can tell from the question, that is exactly the
yeah.
the answer they have been looking for.
Yeah.
So okay, let me check if we have any more. Okay, so maybe this is something that we might like to discuss before we head to the next statement. So, would this then exclude humanities titles that try to, let me put it on the big screen, that try to put forth diamond open access models? I'm thinking of literary titles that include works of fiction or poetry.
Yeah, not sure what to do about those. As long as those as works of fiction of poetry are not probably not scholarly research, or do not classify as scholarly research in my definition of scholarly research. But again, I mean, if these are properly peer reviewed, why not? You know, I mean, if you can show that there has been a reviewing process, selecting those with arguments and so on and so forth, I could imagine that. But these are really borderline cases, I believe, that are interesting to look at. I mean, I'm open to an argument why they should be included, but I couldn't say just bluntly that they are or are not. I mean, really depends on, is there a selection process that follows a procedure that is common in that field?
And here I would also trust a bit the cohort that you want to identify with, because we won't be putting up huge rewards of money that if you identify as diamond, then you have free croissants forever every morning. So if a journal that is not on the margin, but is not within the strict limits of what in our Western Northern world we define as this is true research, wants to be identified within the cohort of Diamond Open Access Publishing, then I think it doesn't do much harm. And I would rather, for me, the risk is much higher that we exclude the ones that we should be including if we are too strict on our criteria, than having a few journals disguising as Diamond Open Access, whereas in fact they hate open access and they are not at all interested in equitable open access.
Yeah, no, I do believe it. These are interesting questions. I mean, an argument would have to be made, right? But I mean, this is what we're all about. We're not about including or excluding on the basis of formal criteria. This is something that you know, if people can make a reasonable argument that this is a scholarly journal, this is something that we would definitely listen to, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and looking at the time, I will go to the next statement. If you have any burning questions that we missed during this, you can either choose the next option to post them via Mentimeter or post them in the chat, so they will be more prominent for us to see. With that, so this is for all of you that identify as a publishing service. So as a publishing service, I can apply the presented criteria. So this is mostly about the usability and the pragmatic use of what has just been presented. So for slightly stronger agreement than for the last question. Statement, apologies. If we ever reach 5.0 strongly agree, I will just skip on the slide with the comments, because then I'll just assume everyone is happy. Okay, so I'll give you a few more seconds to vote. Ten, 9, 8, 7. So a few coming on. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's head to the discussion part. Okay, so why do you think these criteria could work for you, or why wouldn't they work for you? Okay. Okay, interesting. So way too specific for a specific field of research. That is interesting. At least the medium-term temporal stability of the no-fee criterion is necessary, so no subscribe to open journals. And for a librarian, these criteria are not easily applicable. Interesting. So there is a question about the criterion of editorial independence. So how is that defined? Maybe we can start by that while the others still post their comments. So is editorial independence very strictly defined within these criteria? Can you elaborate a bit? Johan, you're muted.
I'll unmute myself, sorry. As long as the final decision is made, of course, you can always ask staff for advice, but as long as the final decision is made by a scholar, as it should be, I think, then we're fine. Of course, this is in the editorial independence. I don't think that's an issue, really. And yes, it is not always clear who the owner of a journal is, and that is something that we wish to change. I mean, that really needs some thinking and some work.
Okay, so
yeah, publishers are involved in decision-making processes regarding the choice of editors and editorial board members, and that's exactly what we want to change. So that's definitely something that I don't think is the task of the publisher. I mean, but this is me. I'm very adamant about this because this is a personal trauma in my case, because that is one of the exact reasons why I left Elsevier with my journal. The lack of independence of the publisher with respect to the choice of the editorial board.
okay, so maybe you can also elaborate, because you had this kind of talking point about subscribe to open. So could you briefly elaborate how the subscribe to
Yes.
open fits into these criteria? Because I think it has led to a bit of confusion, judging from the
Yes,
comments.
well, I mean, if you look at as subscribe to open, I mean, they do fulfill most of the criteria in the sense that there is no fees to authors and readers, right? Because it's the libraries paying via the subscription. So there's no fees there. The only issue with S2O that I can see in terms of our criteria is the issue of ownership, because obviously in S2O, the ownership of the journal is with the publisher. And so that is the issue there. Do we include S2O journals into Diamond on the condition that a declaration of independence is issued in collaboration with the publisher, of course? Or do we say, no, we are completely, orthodox about this. The ownership has to be in the hands of the title has to be in the hands of the academic community? That is the question before us, actually.
One problem that I personally have with Subscribe to Open is that the investment of the community is not into the infrastructure itself, but into the accessibility to the content. And therefore, I am not that totally happy with Subscribe to Open as defining it as, yes, this is a full flavor of Diamond, because the idea is also that the community owns the infrastructures around creating the content and around displaying the content. And to the question of Hazim in the chat, infrastructures require funding as well. And so therefore we said, if authors and funding requirements of a country allow voluntary contributions, then that's totally fine. Because if authors have money that they can give to a journal, that is totally fine, because operating the infrastructure requires funds. But the point is that it's the way we insisted on mandatory fees and also no hidden mandatory fees. But if we would have said no fees at all, then we would cut the funding source of several institutions and several journals and several initiatives, and therefore it's about the mandatory fee.
Just very briefly, because this adds up to what has just been discussed about the Subscribe for Open. So then this was posted in the chat, which is why I am saying this now instead of showing you on the Mentimeter. One of the problems for Subscribe to Open is that at any time they can decide to close their content. So how would that fit into that?
Yes, that is true. In that case, they would be kicked out. I think that's very simple. But don't forget that the content is the content that has up to that moment been published will still be available open access. Huh? So it's not as if then the entire journal disappears behind a paywall. And until now, in the Subscribe to Open, no journal has gone back to subscription. So we have to have some confidence there. But yes, I mean, this would require constant monitoring. That's clear. That's
well,
but again, there's many interesting questions here that we would need to look at in more.
I'll briefly, slowly
society, staff, of course, that trains editors, all of that is fine, right? I mean, that's also why I said the editorial team or their staff. I mean, it's not that this has to be just that it has to be just the scholars.
And here it is, if we don't talk about a black or white, but what Johan was really emphasizing, that if the publisher has its own agenda and is fiddling around with what is published and how it's published, and not in the sense of I'm helping the editors to do what they want to do as researchers or scholars or scientific authors, but in the sense of I want them to publish faster so that I can collect more money from libraries, then we have a problem.
Yeah, but that's why you mentioned the quotas, right? Can we come back to these? Things are not often black or white, Sona, because I mean, it's not that gray, I think. If peer review is provided only for part of the published articles, well, then it's not it's not a scholarly journal in that sense. I mean, I'm sorry, but that's, I mean, if it's a hybrid journal in any way, it's probably not for us. If the review is not in the external and independent, that is something that we didn't say. We didn't say that peer review has to be external and independent. All we said is there has to be a process of scholarly selection of some sort. We know two main types, right? One is external peer review. Indeed, you invite external experts to evaluate the paper. But in many communities, there's also a process of internal peer review, where it is the editorial team that looks at the papers and decides which papers to publish. And of course, they also have a process of quality selection that is justified and that can be made open. As long as it is clear what the selection process is, we are fine with it. It just, the only criterion is, has it been examined properly before publication? And that is absolutely essential, especially in times of AI and ChatGPT, where papers are, and paper mills, where papers are produced without even thinking about it. We need to have, as a scholarly community, the responsibility, take that responsibility for everything we publish, and that requires scrutiny, whether it's external independent or internal with an editorial committee. That is what we need to do. Otherwise, it doesn't count. That is a quality criterion that we must hold there, I think.
And this actually goes back to something that seems to be very prominent in the answers, because there seems to be some hesitance to apply this criterion of peer review or scrutiny. Let's call it scrutiny for a moment, because it is not defined what it means.
Of course, it is defined. I don't see how it is not defined what that means.
Yep.
It means more than one person has to have had a look at the paper, examined it, read it to begin with, which doesn't happen, as we know, at certain commercial publishers, as we have seen lately, especially with these paper mills. Has read it, has formed an opinion about it, and has made comments on it that can be traced. So
Yeah,
I think that's what scrutiny means. Yeah.
I'm looking for the comment that says it doesn't. Okay, I don't find it, so maybe that was just
I can
my
see it there. I
imagination.
mean,
Okay.
there are many hybrid journals that have content that is not peer reviewed in the humanities.
Yeah.
Translations,
And here,
critiques.
I would say if your journal is more like a repository or preprint server where everybody can simply paste it, and as soon as you enter the content as an author and your metadata, then it's online, then probably there has been no quality control going on. But if, for instance, as a linguistic journal, you publish certain essays or poems because you think they are really important for research on cultural questions, you have made a selection. You don't just take any poem, or anybody can start to enter their poems. So if there is a selection going on, and if you have a procedure that says yes or no, and you check the quality and say, I don't take in everything, then that is reviewing, because we had these heavy discussions that and probably many of you know these discussions even within your institutions, that the disciplines that exert double-blind peer review would say, yeah, but humanities content, that's not peer-reviewed, as if the humanities don't exercise quality control. But it's a different way of quality control, and this we try to include in our definition to say disciplines have their own culture of assessing quality and deciding yes or no. And
yes, and I think what we need to have is, I mean, rather than be defensive about this and say, yeah, but not everything is peer reviewed, is have a discussion of what that selection means. I think what we need to do is to engage these journals into a discussion that they make explicit what the criteria are on the basis of which they select content. Take, for instance, the notion of interview here. I cannot imagine that you publish an interview just as a transcript of what has been said without ever looking at it and without editing it for certain words, without discussing it with the interviewees. There has been some process of quality control when you publish an interview. Right. Same with critiques. You're not going to publish a critique that is full of expletives, for instance, or or harsh language. This is something that you edit. This is something that you look at. Not everything is peer reviewed, indeed, but there are processes of curation and selection. I believe in every publishing endeavor that is, worth its name. But like we said, it's not just peer review. We explicitly said not just peer review.
And similarly, when I say this because this was posted in the chat and not in the Mentimeter, or at least I haven't found it in the Mentimeter yet, is that the term independence needs clearer definition. So
yeah, I'm not sure what that means, a clear definition. I think for me, I mean, I'm not sure what more I can say in addition to the slide that I showed, in the sense that for me, editorial independence means that there is no interference of the service provider, the technical service provider or the publisher, in the operations of selection that the scholarly editors of the journal are engaged in. I mean, it's the scholarly editors and the editorial team of the journal that should have full control over what gets published and how it is improved. That is my point. And this doesn't mean that that editors cannot be paid by an organization. There's someone says, well, they are paid organizations, paid editors, it leads to articles being published, but that may very well be the case, but that's orthogonal to the discussion. What is essential to the discussion is that the editors have complete independence from the commercial side of the journal, the part that needs, yeah, that's my point.
Yeah, because Johan, I was going to bring a counter example now. We have a journal at Göttingen University Press, and then we realized that there was a bit of a tendency of one of the editors to include vanity publishing, and that we as the publishers had to interfere with the editorial practices and saying, we think you need to be a bit more harsh on what you actually publish. But the point that you just made is we didn't say this out of commercial interest. But we said it.
This is also why I have the final point of my Declaration of Independence also says there has to be a procedure for the resolution of conflict. So this could be a conflict, right? Where you see as a publisher that things get published that you don't agree with. Well, that is something that you need to engage a discussion on. It's not like that, like anything goes.
Yeah.
If there is a conflict, then you appoint a third party that is independent and that looks at all the arguments back and forth, and that comes to an advice. I think these are problems that you're always going to have, but for me, it's very important to separate this issue of content-related elements towards from that of service-related elements.
Yeah. And it's quite important to say there is something like an integrity of a publisher or a learned society that they need to keep also vis-a-vis editorial boards. But there is, if the economic interests of the service provider start to interfere with the editorial freedom, then we really have a problem. There is not a problem if the more professional side of publishing, for instance, the publisher tells the editor, look, you need to use the right typographical things. There are problems with the language. There is a problem with the quality. That is not meant with the interference of editorial independence, because if the publisher and the more professional side of publishing doesn't interfere with these things, then we have a problem with the general scientific integrity of publishing.
No, of course. But this is also why I have this one sentence about resolution of conflicts, right? I mean, you have two parties, but the point really is you have two parties that are in negotiation with each other. On the one hand, you have the service provider, and on the other hand, you have the scholarly community that wants to publish it and has control over the quality of the content of the quality.
Okay, so I would like to highlight two comments that have been made within this question before we maybe head to the next statement, unless there is something super urgent. So first of all, this may be just rather a brief answer by you. So have the criteria been mapped against some examples of no-pay journals rather than the other way around?
Yes, I am the editor of a journal myself, so I have in my mind compared this to the journal that I edit, that I've been editing for 9 years.
Okay. Thank you.
I have that kind of independence, yes.
So the answer to this is very briefly, yes, I have been. And maybe this might be something that might be able to highlight the connection to research assessment that is connected with all of what we're doing. which is basically where there are paid editors by an organization, it often leads to articles being published by those that have the best reputations in the field. So how they just connect?
Well, frankly, I think there is no real connection between who pays the editor and who takes in the highly reputational authors, because then there is, this can happen in any circumstance. If a journal doesn't have the integrity to look at the content and only looks at the name of the author, that's a highly recognized scholar, the article is really bad, but we take him in anyway because he's cited so much, then there's a general problem. This has nothing to do who's doing the payroll for the editor. This is a general integrity problem then.
Yes, exactly. I think who the editor is paid by or not paid by. I mean, you can very easily imagine, for instance, the case of a scholarly society that pays an editor to do or editors to do the work on the journal. But that doesn't mean that they're not independent. I mean, any editor that I know, any scholarly editor that I know, knows that their reputation depends on the articles that they publish. I mean, this is something that I'm always very aware of when I publish articles. I mean, this is also about my reputation. If I publish a crap article, people will come back to me about it, and they should. And they should have the possibility of sacking me if I publish too many articles that are not up to standards. And that is actually one of the things that we have in our constitution, in our way. I mean, I serve for 3 years, and people can agree to not continue my co-editor-in-chief-ship. And that's the way it should be. I mean, this is not about. This should be. Yeah.
And then here's a really good comment on editors are selected and managed by the publisher, the institution, not the community. So it's never about full independence. Sometimes editorial boards, and especially when it's groups of scholars that convene to publish a journal, then it's the community finding its publishing outlet through what they do. But there will be always biases and agenda settings and people who think that they are the best representation of the community, whereas in fact they are maybe just very vocal. These problems are human. These problems are not publishing intrinsic. And so, yes, we won't be solving them with the Diamond Open Access definition, but I think this is part of the Diamond Open Access community that we're really, really struggling with these things, and that we are really trying to contemplate. So, for instance, the brilliant comment that the independence of editorial boards shouldn't be just declared by the editorial board itself, but also supported by the publisher. This is brilliant.
Yes, I think so too. I think that's a very good idea, because that means that it's really the result of a negotiation between the publisher and the editorial board, and that there is an agreement that this is the way forward. And I think this is actually not a problem for publishers, for many publishers, even relatively large publishers that use Subscribe to Open, for instance. I mean, many or smaller publishers, those are very often publishers who are very happy that people want to be editors of these journals, and they often afford a lot of independence to their editorial teams. I mean, that was also the case for me, when I started with Lingua in 1999. For Elsevier, I had complete independence over the journal. I had complete independence in selecting my associate editors, what I published. I mean, and that was also stated in a 1-page contract. 15 years later, I had a 27-page contract that didn't allow me to do anything anymore. So guess why I left? So this is really something that we should be very keen about. And a publisher who knows what's good for them should afford this kind of independence to their editorial team. With, of course, the caveats that we noted. I mean, if they think something is going wrong, they have the right to intervene. but not heavy-handedly in a situation of negotiation, and as it should be, you know. And if that doesn't lead to a resolution, then there is an intermediary who tries to solve the situation. And of course, as is the case in any of those negotiations, both parties have to agree that they will accept the outcome of the independent counselor in this case. I mean, these are things that can be overcome, I believe. These are not, and because these are not situations that are unique to scholarly publishing.
Thank you very much. So to all participants, you have almost done it. We are at the last statement. By the way, thank you very much for being such a proactive audience. It's been great so far for us.
Very thoughtful comments, and something that we really need to take. I mean, this is actually why we did this, right? I mean, we don't want to be, you know, sitting in a dark corner inventing all of these things.
Exactly. So your feedback is immensely valuable to us. So thank you already. And so let's power through the last few minutes of this meeting. So the last statement is, based on these criteria, it would be useful to include a metadata field diamond in existing metadata models. Interesting that the enthusiasm is decreasing with more people voting.
It's because yes is easy, right? Yes is like,
I suppose. It looks quite agreeable, though.
Yes, it seems that, you know, a good amount of people do agree.
Okay, so
it will be interesting to see why people disagree. Yeah, it's always
so again, I will give you a few seconds to make up your minds and put in your vote. Aha, Margot. It was you. So, last few seconds running. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And yes, I am aware that I count too fast when counting down seconds. Okay, thank you very much. Let's have a look at what you think about why you disagreed or agreed with that.
One reason probably is not another metadata field.
Which is a fair
Which would be a
assessment, I
fair-
would say. Interesting. So there is a comment about the usability of that field if no one knows what it means.
Yeah, but my response to that is most researchers don't know what metadata are to begin with. So that's not a... Yes, that's solid definition of diamond. Yes, I mean, that's what we're working on, right? Okay, that's a good point. Metadata should describe the content, not the business model. I think that's an important one. Yeah, but the question is really, do we need that in the metadata? I'm divided about that myself, actually. I'm not sure that we need that in the metadata. I think inclusion in the Diamond Discovery Hub, which should be enough.
Interesting. So there are questions about how that would actually work, which is fair. I mean, I feel like this is an ongoing discussion we will have again and again and again, is how do we make sure that the diamondness of these journals is valid from year to year, so that we have an ongoing monitoring process for that, because obviously, and as you rightly pointed out, Johan, we need that.
Yeah, that will need to be monitored indeed. That's didn't say it was going to be easy, people.
Okay, so the question is, for example, here, if how far this definition would fall into one with the definition we are currently working on. So I think this is actually something to think about.
So there is one very important comment. What if the definition of diamond is refined over time? Who updates the data? And this is definitely one of the huge challenges, because if it comes to open access, we have something like agreed concepts of open access if it's freely available and it has licenses that state that this is not just there for some reason, but it's also defined on the licensing field. When it comes to diamond open access, we're talking about flavors. So this will stay difficult, but just because it's difficult, we should not say, then we don't do it. And then it's only open access, and the only thing that we check for is has fees or has no fees.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, these comments actually make me lean on the side of let's not include this in the metadata, because can APC be part of the metadata? I'm not sure. Is that the case?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if you have a metadata field that says fees apply or fees don't apply, or put the number of fees in there, then you can include that. And DOAJ has this as a metadata field. And therefore, I mean, it's and we're not talking about a standardized metadata model.
But it's a black and white one. For instance, at DOAJ, voluntary author contributions are counted as APCs. For now.
That maybe Joanna can answer, because I think the metadata field from DOAJ states if there are mandatory fees.
But are these metadata taken from the articles themselves, or are they taken from the publisher? That's what I'm wondering about.
As far as I know, there are no metadata on the article level that include whether fees have paid, except for the collection of open APC, where you have the DOI plus the fee that had been paid.
I see.
But this is an information that is coming from the ones who paid the fees, the libraries. And yes, Crossref needs to be engaged in this discussion as...
No, totally. That's... I mean, the question really is whether it is desirable. My current tendency on the basis also of the answers is no. But then again, again.
The point is, if we run a registry of any kind that says this is a Diamond Open Access journal, then the fact that it sits already in that collection is a metadata statement, because otherwise it wouldn't be appearing there. And so this is not so much a question of a metadata field stating this is a diamond journal. This is anyway a yes or... This is about the decision, is there a yes or no decision on diamond?
I could be convinced either way. It's
okay, so the state of indecisiveness we have currently reached. So I think what we conclude from this, and I'm sorry, but looking at the time, I think we kind of need to wrap up everything a bit. So what we can conclude from this is that, especially concerning the metadata field, this is maybe a discussion for a later point of time when we have the definition more set out and discussed. But so far it seems like an attractive option to some people, to others not so much. But it surely needs more discussion. I guess this is what we can take as a very general conclusion from this very brief discussion on that. So I would gently go back to my initial slides. And first of all, thank you very much, Johan and Margot, for presenting again and for answering all these questions and for participating in this event with your expertise. Thanks to everyone who answered questions in the chat on behalf of the CRAFT-OA and DIAMAS team. Thanks to Oliver from Liebe, who managed all of this in the background flawlessly. So there was a lot less stress for me. Thank you for that. And first and foremost, thank you to all participants who took part in this community consultation, because as I already said, your feedback is immensely valuable to us, because what we are trying to do is to craft something with you and not present something simply to you, but rather do it with you so that we can actually make sure that the outputs of our work will be fed into the very deep community we are trying to serve. So thank you very much. I can imagine that this event has raised rather a lot of questions in itself. So if you happen to think about it today or tomorrow, or dream about diamond definitions in your sleep, which we all love to do, please give us some feedback. I have inserted a QR code which leads you to a feedback form, which you can then fill out. It would also be immensely valuable if you could tell us how this event worked for you in terms of the format, so we can improve future events. But this review form also does have space for you to leave any further remarks or questions you might have that have been left unanswered during this event simply because of the time or because I missed some of your questions. If that has happened, I apologize for that. If you want to get in touch, please do so. I have put my email address on this very last slide, so if there is any urgent matter, please just shoot me an email. I will either forward you your email to the respective expert or answer you the best I can if it's any organizational matter for this event. Follow us on social media, visit our websites, stay tuned for more events, because I have the tingling feeling there will be more Shaping Diamond Open Access events to come. And again, thank you very much. Oliver will also have posted the link to the feedback form within the chat, so you are not dependent on your smartphone to scan the QR code. And with that, I hope you all have a lovely evening. Thank you for attending, and hopefully see you very soon.